Nunes, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Good morning.
So first, evaluate the Jim Comey testimony that we saw in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee this past week.
Well, you know, on certain days, James Comey has an intelligence level higher than Einstein. He seems to know everything. He takes immaculate notes. He even takes those classified notes home and shares them with a lawyer. Somehow those notes end up in the New York Times. But then other times, like you would think when you've actually opened an investigation into the Trump campaign in Russia, he seems to have amnesia. He's forgotten everything. And look, and I'll just make this point. We asked him specifically, and all the other dirty cops at DOJ and FBI and the intelligence agencies in January of early 2017, where did this dirt come from? None of them seem to know the answer. And you know what, Maria? Every damn person in that room knew the answer except for the Republicans. That's the truth.
Unbelievable. Well, we want to talk more about this. I want to point out this op-ed that Kim Strassel from the Wall Street Journal wrote last week, and it's called The James Comey Election. And in it, she writes, Mr. Comey personifies what enrages Americans after they have gone through 3.5 years of this collusion narrative. She says this was the crew that in 2016, based on the thinnest of tips, launched a counterintelligence investigation into a presidential campaign complete with secret surveillance warrants and informants. She goes on to say this all took place in Barack Obama and Joe Biden's Washington. Those 8 years also featured plenty of other swamp monsters. Don't underestimate the number of Americans who fear a return to that world. Lois Lerner harassing conservative nonprofits, supervisors at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives losing guns in Fast and Furious, the EPA minions who burned companies with ever-changing rules, and the list goes on. This is why she's calling this the James Comey election. Will the American people understand what took place under Joe Biden and Barack Obama's watch and this plan to take down a candidate and then a sitting president, Congressman?
Well, look, Maria, this may sound a little self-serving, but the reason I wrote Countdown to Socialism is exactly for this reason, that people need to understand the consequences of this election. We are going to go back to what we've been living through, this nightmare. For me, it's been 4 years. You have to remember, I was first briefed on this in September, that the Russians were doing something nefarious, but was never given any information. And now what we find out from the briefings we've recently had, and I know you asked Leader McCarthy this, this is a real problem, that these documents that clearly our government had, the legislative branch of government never received these. Remember what I said earlier about that January meeting? Hey, who the hell paid for this? And remember, it was the work that we did, the House Republicans did. We had to fight through subpoenas. We had to prove that it was the Clinton campaign and the DNC that had paid for the dirty dossier and this dirty information. Remember all of that happened? We should have been, they knew about this 4 years ago when myself and Speaker at the time, Paul Ryan, were briefed, and they hid this from us, and they continued to hide it all the way until we uncovered it. But I will tell you, the documents that are underlying that we now have seen, I've only seen a few of those. They're definitely smoking guns. That information definitely needs to be made available to the American public. And from what I understand, there's even more underlying evidence that backs up what Director Ratcliffe put out. And just think how long it took for us to figure out this information. I know it's mind-boggling. This has been a very difficult task for us to get to the bottom of, because you have corrupt officials. And I think that's the point here. Are you going to go back and elect somebody like Biden, who just the other night, Maria, had the audacity to go after President Trump once again for what? That Putin, I think he said he had Putin wrapped around his finger. And then he didn't answer the question of why did his son get $3.5 million from a Russian oligarch with ties to Putin? If Ivanka Trump had been bought a Big Mac in the Red Square by a Russian oligarch, they would have locked her up and they would have said, this is evidence of collusion. Here you have the media, which is the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party, ignoring all of this for the last 4 years. And now you have on a debate stage why did your son get paid $3.5 million from a Russian oligarch? So here they've been blaming Republicans have something to do with Russia when the whole damn time they have something to do with Russia. I think what they think is that it's okay for them to take all this money and grift, but they'll just take and accuse Republicans of doing it to cover up their tracks. And that's basically what we knew about this the whole time. There was plenty of circumstantial evidence to know this, Maria, that the Clinton campaign had created all of this because they knew that 33,000 emails were out there somewhere. They knew that Jason Chaffetz and House Republicans were trying to find those emails. So what did they do? They created a sick fantasy. Okay, this was the Clinton campaign. I want you to remember this. The Clinton campaign created this sick fantasy. Then they went out and hired avatars to do it. So they hired a former British spy named Steele who did the Steele dossiers. Then they hired this suspected Russian spy, okay, so that they could give it a veneer of being a Russian. So imagine that. Now you have the Democrats hiring Russian spies, getting $3.5 million from Moscow, and nobody in the media seems to give a damn about it. And so I think what Leader McCarthy said is exactly right. Every Republican, senator, and member of Congress should be saying, this is over. We want every damn bit of evidence that every intelligence agency has, or it's maybe time to shut those agencies down. Because at the end of the day, our liberties are more important than anything else we have in this country, and they have been stampeded over by these dirty cops and the Democratic Party and the media who fails to report on it.
Yeah, this is absolutely shameful that this report last week that DNI Ratcliffe declassified got no coverage from the mainstream media. No coverage. What a disgrace that our liberties and rights have been trampled over because of one political campaign coming up with an idea to stir up a fantasy, stir up a scandal around the other political campaign. And the FBI went right along with it and weaponized our intelligence agencies to go against Donald Trump. So what else can you tell us about this? You were briefed by DNI Ratcliffe, part of the Gang of Eight, a small group of 8 congressmen who are privy to intelligence out of the executive branch. What can you tell us? Is there more coming? And by the way, you just said many times you've never seen this. When this story first came out last week, that is the first thing that the media said. This was out and it was debunked. What you're saying is you've never seen this.
Yeah. Well, look, remember, the media is essentially the Democratic National Committee. So they're putting out the same propaganda to cover up the tracks because the media was involved in this the whole time. Remember what I was saying, that we were looking for all this information because we suspected, and look, it was really, I got to credit Lee Smith, the investigative journalist who actually wrote about this in his book. He actually discovered, just by going through and looking at what the media was saying, looking at what the campaign was saying, and the timing of it all, and then he actually got his hands on what these are really unknown. Only Lee Smith has these, the proto-dossiers. So these were the early dossiers. And I would encourage everybody to go back and look at the early dossiers before you got to the Steele dossiers. So essentially what you had is you had these sick fantasies that were in these proto-dossiers that then they hired the Russian spy and the British spy to make it look like it was real, to cover up what the Clinton campaign was doing. And so now there's a bunch of underlying evidence that I've only seen a little bit of this week. I think there's a lot more of it. I will also say this, if you ask of other information that I think we need to see. We need to see, we had this FBI agent, 302 came out about his recollection of everything that had happened. So the Russian spy that the Democrats hired that actually worked for a left-wing think tank called the Brookings Institute, we need to see, he was interviewed 3 times. And in fact, he was even given, supposedly he was given a get out of jail free card because he testified. Now, when he testified, he said, I don't have anything. At least that's what we're being told by Horowitz and others. The American public needs to see the 3 reports that we know about, at least, from the Democrats' Russian spy that they hired. So that's additional documents that we need to see. And then just on another note, you see that that McCabe isn't going to testify this week because he's fearful for his safety. He's supposed to testify before the Senate. This is new evidence too. I'm not familiar with COVID transmitting over the internet, but it seems the dirty cops at the FBI, They can get COVID over the internet now. It's a shame that these guys now are not going to testify before the Senate.